am really excited today to have our partners from Charlotte. We have at Read by Fourth been in partnership with Read Charlotte from day one of Read by Fourth. As many of you know, there's a whole network of communities around the country that are doing grade level reading campaigns. There's a very small handful that I consider peers and who I continue to look to for ideas and share ideas and resources back and forth between them. If you check out Read Charlotte's website, you will see similarities between us for good reason. They're doing great work. And one of the things that I rely on Read Charlotte for is their commitment to research. Monroe digs deep in the research. If I ever want to know what are some best practices and where does that come and what research does it come from, Monroe is my first call. So when I learned that they were building their own tutoring program based on research and what they had learned, I wanted to take a closer look, and I'm really excited about what I've been seeing. And in Philadelphia, many of you know, we've been talking about how to expand tutoring options for children in a way that could potentially be scalable. And so I'd like you all to listen to what they are learning, what they're doing, and help us think about where this could be used in Philadelphia if it's a good fit for us. So they will kick it off and present, and there'll be time for us to discuss. And I'm going to kick it over to my partner in crime, Monroe Richardson.
Thanks, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually, and want to echo what Jenny said. Please take the lunch part of Lunch and Learn seriously. I'm excited to be here to with my colleagues to talk a little bit to you about Queen City Readers. I just want to start off with a little bit of an overview of who's here and sort of frame Read Charlotte and where this work sits. I'm the executive director of Read Charlotte. Also today presenting will be the two brilliant women that developed this initiative from scratch and oversee its work. Madison Brown, our K-1 impact manager, and Charlotte Downing, our literacy facilitator. We also have a few of our other colleagues from Read Charlotte that are also joining us virtually as well today. Next slide. So Jenny has been just a tremendous partner over the last 8 years, and we definitely look at Read by Fourth as one of our few true peers and the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading Network. Here in Charlotte, we are a community literacy initiative, just like Read by Fourth. We don't run programs. Our job is to unite educators, community partners, and families to improve early literacy from birth through third grade. A lot of our work really centers around being a capacity building intermediary. That means helping our partners achieve their goals, helping them to increase their impact, and also to help them sort of bridge the research and practice divide. Next slide. I just want to ground today's discussion because we're going to talk about a specific intervention program that we developed designed to help primarily kindergartners with their word reading skills. But I want to zoom out just a bit to talk about the bigger picture. This is, and I won't get too deep into this, but this is the direct and indirect effects model of reading. This is by professor at UC Irvine, Dr. Young-Suk Kim. This is, in my opinion, the state of the art for the science of early literacy. Some of you may be aware of the new handbook on the science of early literacy that was published earlier this week. This is from chapter 1 in the handbook, and I think it does a beautiful job of describing all the different components that go into helping build children's reading comprehension, and importantly, how they interact with each other. I won't go deep into this, but the main thing I want to highlight is that the two primary processes that contribute to successful reading comprehension are word reading and listening comprehension. And we actually have a new whole entirely separate body of work that our team is working on related to listening comprehension and a whole bunch of advocacy work that we're starting up. But we would be reticent. Every single one of our team would know we're only talking about half of the equation if we don't lift this up. So we just really wanted to make sure that we're clear. Kids need help in both the word reading and listening comprehension skills. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, we're capacity building intermediary. We work to help our partners apply evidence-based knowledge about effective reading instruction and interventions. We focus as much on high quality execution, continuous improvement. And in fact, what you're going to hear about today, we've actually submitted a proposal to the Carnegie Foundation to present at the next Summit on Improvement in the spring, to talk about how we've worked to try to use a continuous improvement process to apply an evidence-based intervention. What you're going to hear about is actually, we first learned about it, I think, in 2017, 18. It was actually referenced in the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide for K-3 reading comprehension. And Madison will provide a bit more context, but it really is a great example of how we've worked to sort of close the research to practice divide. Madison, is this my last slide?
Yes,
or do I have one more?
No.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Monroe. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, if you will, that started about a year ago in a boardroom, as all great stories start. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we ended up at QC Readers, and then Charlotte's going to actually walk you through what the materials look like and give you like a really tangible sense of what we're talking about. So at Read Charlotte, we have the chance a lot of times to take something from opportunity all the way through to execution. And this is just a great example of how that happened. So about a year ago, we were, like everybody else, kind of dealing with the post-pandemic crisis, right? So our children have been through a variety of things, virtual schooling, homeschooling, hybrid schooling, et cetera. And we'd had enough data locally to know that we were still in crisis mode. Our students universally were affected by the pandemic. And so we had great demand for tutoring, for support for early literacy. We were estimating roughly half of our K-3 students locally needed tutoring. But we knew, just because of the work that we do, that the supply was way outweighed by the demand. We had a very small amount of tutoring seats available. And so even if all the tutoring seats were filled, we were still looking at a significant portion of students who needed tutoring that just did not have access to it. So we started talking as a team about what other capacity currently existed within our community that we could tap into to provide tutoring. So traditional tutoring requires the tutor to be highly trained, to be skilled, to have a background in education, or to go through like a 2-week training to be able to tutor. And so we started thinking, how could we kind of pull traditional tutoring apart? We called it unbundling tutoring at the beginning, and kind of put it back together in a way that would allow us to use a different type of volunteer and potentially much more. So we kind of had this idea of sort of your average community member in our head, of someone with basically a high school education who didn't have a formal literacy or education background. How could we design something for that tutor to be able to support? Because if we could do that, that meant a lot more students eventually could have access to tutoring. We also knew that kindergarten was really important. We were beginning to really hone in on the idea that intervening early was really critical. And so we were looking at those early years for where we wanted to focus the support. We also knew that foundational word reading skills were going to be critical, especially at that early age. So that's kind of where we started. We had some goals initially when we started this project. We wanted, like I said, the content to be deliverable by a high school educated adult. So that began to limit what we could teach on, is because we knew it needed to be able to be delivered by a community member. We wanted to make sure whatever the content was, it required minimal training, not a lot of materials. The materials needed to be easily distributable. So it couldn't be something where you have to like load up a backpack of materials and lug it around town. And we also knew that we wanted students to be able to start decoding. So actually applying those word reading skills really early in the program. We didn't want it to be something that took several weeks to get to that point. We wanted that skill of decoding to start practice really from the first lesson. And then you'll see at the bottom, we also looked at our state standards for foundational reading to make sure we were aligned to what students needed at that age. So one thing that Charlotte and I did early on that I think really allowed us to be successful is we set design principles for ourselves. So we knew, Charlotte and I both formerly taught first grade, and so this was kind of our wheelhouse. And we knew that the amount of things we could do was really wide, and we needed to set boundaries for ourselves to make sure that we were disciplined as we created a tool. So I'm just going to park in a couple of these because I think when you hear these, it'll help you understand why we made some of the decisions we made. So these design principles served as essentially guardrails for us to make sure that every time we came upon a decision, we had a set of principles to help us guide that decision making. So the first one is that rapid development of decoding skills. So I'm going to show you in a minute what our approach is from a content perspective, but we knew that that was going to guide what content we chose, what activities students were doing within the lessons. Another one was being material light. So we made a lot of decisions about making sure that there weren't a significant amount of materials for a tutor to handle. We wanted enough structure that whoever picked up the materials could accurately deliver it. So they needed enough of a script, enough of a set of directions that we could count on consistent delivery and accurate delivery. However, we also wanted there to be some flexibility, because often in that like tutor-student relationship, you want the tutor to be able to be responsive to the student in front of them, and we wanted them to be able to make adjustments as needed. So we tried to strike a balance between giving enough support that it was easy to execute, but not so much that it was overly scripted. So like I said, you'll see, I think, the evidence of some of these design principles when we show you the materials. So what is it? We came up with 62 lessons. Each lesson is 20 minutes long. They are identical in structure. So it is the same routine every single time, but it is each lesson is focused on one sound. And it's a different sound for each lesson. All students start on lesson 1. This was part of a design decision. We knew if we needed to administer a placement test, that was going to immediately complicate who could deliver the materials. And so we made the decision that all students would start on lesson 1. We know that likely limits who can use the materials, but we were comfortable with that because it allowed for ease of use. It is a one-to-one delivery, and we think students need it at least 3 times a week to feel confident that it's going to make an impact on their skills. We have landed on light training for tutors. I'll talk a little bit about how we landed there, but basically the tutor needs 15 minutes of pre-work. It's watching 2 videos asynchronously on a website, and that's all they really need to get started. So going back to the design principles, I mentioned the rapid decoding development. So this is what Monroe referenced earlier that we found 5 or 6 years ago. Synthetic phonics is an approach to phonics that teaches students to learn each individual letter sound correspondence and then actually synthesize them together. And so it's quite different from how we traditionally teach phonics in the United States. However, it's very typical of how they teach phonics in the UK. And so we were able to kind of look across the pond for some examples. And if you've ever seen Jolly Phonics, they use a synthetic approach. There's some popular curriculums over there that use this approach. But the idea is you teach each letter, each phoneme really in an intentional order so that students really early on are able to blend the phonemes together to make words. So if you look at, these are the first 10 letter sounds that are in Queen City Readers. And if you look at even the first 5, after they've learned those 5 letter sounds, they can put together multiple words. And so after just really 2 weeks of lessons, students are able to actually attempt to sound out words, which is really early. And it's a good thing because it puts the focus on building the skill of decoding rather than really sitting in the letter or the letter sound. And after successful completion of all 62 lessons, we think students will be equipped to decode over 1,000 words. So we're really building that bank early. And like I said, there were multiple reasons. So it's evidence-based. We saw the evidence in the literature. And so we knew that this was a viable approach for developing their skills. But additionally, we felt like having that early decoding would give some success for the student as well as the tutor. I think in our experience, we found that tutors really want to feel like they're making an impact. And although we're focused on student outcomes, we have to use adults to get there. And so helping make sure that both the tutor and the student felt successful early in their tutoring journey together, we felt like was really critical for this to be something that was carried out. So loosely speaking, there's 2 levels. Letters level is 26 lessons. So it's those first 26 letters of the alphabet, but taught again in that intentional order based on synthetic phonics. So it's all the single letter phonemes. It's mostly CVC words that they're exposed to, and that's roughly equivalent to kindergarten. And then the words level is kind of your more complex phonics. So CVCE words, digraphs, vowel teams, all those things. And that's roughly 1st grade. And we have worked to simplify the materials so that you don't necessarily need to know what a digraph is, but we've given you enough directions to be able to teach it. And then there's some high frequency word practice embedded throughout the materials. So this goes back to a little bit of what Monroe said earlier. What this does do is help strengthen the early word reading skills. What it is not doing is directly supporting comprehension of any kind or fluency. So we just like to be really explicit with our partners about this. This is one piece of what students need. So I'm going to have Charlotte walk you through what the lessons actually look like.
Great, thanks, Madison. So as Madison just shared, we have 62 lessons for Queen City readers split across those two levels, the letters level and the words level, and all students start in that letters level. They all start on lesson 1. Across those 62 lessons, every single lesson is structured the same, which is really big benefit to the tutors and to the students. As they do more lessons, they learn that structure and it becomes really predictable for both the student and the tutor. Next slide. So every lesson has one focus sound. Students will learn that sound, they'll practice that sound in context, and then they'll apply their knowledge of the new sound to knowledge of previously learned words and sounds. Like Madison said, there is high frequency word practice embedded throughout each lesson in a decodable that we wrote, but it's optional. So students don't have to engage with that if they are not ready or they don't have the energy that day or whatever it might be, but it is there should students want it. So now I'm going to walk through what an actual lesson looks like. Again, just to reiterate, what happens in this lesson and the structure of this lesson is exactly what it is for all 62 lessons. So every single lesson has 3 direction pages. These directions guide you through what to do. We found in our pilot that after a few lessons, the tutors really didn't depend on these because, again, it's the same structure. These directions are highly structured, so they tell you exactly what to do, but they are not scripted, which allows for the tutor to be responsive to the student in front of them, which we felt was really important as we were designing these. Behind the lesson pages are the student-facing materials that are in front of the kindergarten, first grade, whichever student is in front of them to learn and practice the sound. So the first part of every lesson is the introduction and articulation. So we're going to walk through lesson 5. So lesson 5, the focus sound is P, or the sound that the letter P makes. So the tutor will say, this is the letter P, P makes the P sound, and they'll practice that together. And this helps the student learn that sound in isolation and really just get kind of some grounding about what they're going to focus on for that particular lesson. After they learn how to pronounce the sound, they'll learn how to form the sound. So they'll practice the letter formation. We have arrows that guide the tutor and how to show the student how to form it. So the tutor will demonstrate, and then the student will go ahead and do it. All of these sheets are protected, so the students can use dry erase markers on them, which has been we found that to be really helpful for the student. After they practice forming the letter, they'll move to the picture card. So this picture card functions to help the student build that letter sound correspondence. So the tutor will read the words on the page, like pie, for example, and ask the student to find the letter that makes the P sound within the word pie. So they're seeing the word pie, they're hearing the word pie, and they're having to isolate which of those letters in the word pie makes the P sound. So it's really helping them strengthen letter sound correspondence. And they do that for all of the words on the page. After that, they do a quick review of the sounds that they've already learned. So this is lesson 5. So these are lessons 1 through 4. The tutor points to a letter and the student should say the sound that the letter makes. So they would say at it. And it's just a quick review to keep the student kind of engaged with the sounds that they've already learned before they go into kind of the meat of the lesson, where they'll use all of this knowledge together. So every lesson has a word bank that the next kind of section is embedded in. So the main part of the lesson uses Elkonin boxes or sound boxes, which help the student with phonemic awareness and with some decoding and encoding. So the tutor will use the word bank, which is in the middle of this page, and there are 10 words in every lesson's word bank. These words are selected based on the sounds that this student has already learned. So those are primarily encodable and decodable based on which sounds the student has already learned. The student will first tap all of those sounds, and then they'll spell all of the words that are in this word bank. So for example, if the word is tap, the tutor might prompt the student to tap the sounds they hear in the word tap in the blue boxes. And if we go to the next slide, I can show you kind of what that would look like. So they would use the blue boxes at the bottom of the page and go tap across those 3 boxes, and then practice blending those sounds back together after they've segmented them. After the tutor and the student tap each one of those 10 words out, then they'll go back and try and spell those 10 words and really practice again that letter sound correspondence and that spelling. As if you go back one page. So if you see on the word pot, there's an O that is highlighted green. We've done this to help the tutor support the student with letters and sounds they don't know during that spelling portion. So if the student hasn't learned a spelling pattern or a sound through Queen City Readers, we've highlighted it green to signal to the tutor this is somewhere where you can really provide extra support because the student might not know it because they haven't practiced it with this content. So after they've tapped and they spelled, the student will engage in a quick check. So all this is the same 10 words from that word bank, and the student will do their best to sound out or read these words. Again, same 10 words, they've tapped them, they've spelled them, and now they just are going to try to read them. As the student is reading these, the tutor will use the back page of the directions to keep track of the words that the student reads correctly, whether that means they go pip, or they read it automatically and say pip. They're keeping track of the words that the student reads correctly. And again, the words that have spelling patterns or sound patterns that the student is unfamiliar with are pre-checked because it's not expected the student would know it through our content. If the student reads 8 or more words correctly on their first attempt at a lesson, they'll move on to the next lesson. If they read 7 or less correctly on their first attempt at a lesson, they'll repeat the lesson once and then move on. We decided to have students have the opportunity to repeat the lesson for repeated exposure, but we didn't want students to get stuck in a lesson because one of the things we really wanted the student and the tutor to feel was success and early on and consistently. So because of that, the students get to repeat and then move on. There's also kind of a looped nature to the lesson. So even if the student doesn't master that phoneme in that particular lesson, they'll continue getting exposure through it through other lessons. So it's not like a one and done. So where the tutor records all of this is on a progress tracker, which has 2 functions. On the left-hand side of your screen is the student part of this is one sheet. So on the front part of the page is the student version of the progress tracker. And the student writes their name or puts a sticker or a smiley face, whatever they want to do in the box after they finished a lesson. So if you finish lesson 5, they would put a sticker in lesson 5 in that box. It also functions like a game board for the student. So when a student finishes a lesson with a celebration face, they get a small prize. During our pilot, we had, I think, yo-yos and slime and slap bracelets and all those fun things that kids love to use and play with. And they got to choose, and it was really exciting for them, and it helped them stay really engaged with their lessons and kind of helped them with some goal setting, which was really awesome. And then the back side of this progress tracker is kind of record keeping for tutors. So what are the students scoring? It kind of also guides them to know after 2 lessons, they go ahead and move on to the next one. It also helps for students that have different tutors that they see consistently. So if they have one tutor on Mondays and a different tutor on Wednesdays, it's a way for those tutors to communicate what the student has done. So the tutor that comes next knows where to pick up and what lesson to do. So after they've done all this, the student can engage in an optional decodable passage. So this is where the high frequency word practice comes in. At the top in that gray box are 4 Fry's first 100 words. Every lesson has 4 words in there. If the students go through all 62 lessons, they'll gain exposure to all of Fry's first 100 words. So they practice this word. For example, the tutor might say, repeat after me, is, you, that, it, and they go through those and kind of gain exposure. And then they start to read the passage. So the student reads the bolded words and the tutor reads the gray words. So it's kind of a shared reading. I will say these passages are written with as many words as we could possibly fit that are decodable to the student based on what they've learned. So they are silly stories, and the function of these is not comprehension and it's not fluency. We want the student really to be focusing on accurate word reading. So there's a lot of decodable words in here for the student, but these aren't meant for the student to be answering comprehension questions afterwards. Their focus is on accurate word reading. With that, we found that tutors could use the materials with very little training or no training at all, but we also found that tutors felt more comfortable using the materials, having a little bit of an overview of what to do. It was more a confidence thing than a success thing. So we built a quick training. It's about 15 minutes and it's hosted on this site. So there are 2 videos for the tutor to watch for their training. The first one gives an overview about what Queen City Readers is, and the second one demos a lesson and shows them exactly what to do. Again, all lessons are the same, so it doesn't matter if the tutor is starting on lesson 1 or they're joining a program late, they'll be able to watch the video and know what to do for any lesson. Also hosted on this website is a frequently asked questions document. There's tips and tricks. There's all sorts of things to support the tutor, and all of the lesson materials are on there should a tutor want to preview them. Embedded in every lesson is a QR code at the very top that, when it's scanned, will take you to a 5-second video that demonstrates correct pronunciation for that particular sound. We know that some vowel teams and even some short vowels and things like that, the pronunciation can be hard to figure out. And so we have that as a support for the tutors that want it. And then another form of support that we've added for the tutors are these one-pagers that Madison referenced earlier. This comes into play mostly in the words level, that second level, with those kind of first grade level phonics like magic E or digraph. So 2 letters that form one sound, think like CH, SH, things like that. That give a really quick overview of what that particular kind of phonics skill is to help the tutor better support the student. Because it's the same structure every time, I think they'd be able to do it without this, but this is also to just build the tutor's confidence that they know exactly what pattern they're working with. So we've tried our best to kind of build supports to make sure that the tutor and the student feel really successful. And that's kind of an overview of what the materials are. And I'm going to pass it back to Madison so she can talk about some of our next steps and the things that we're learning right now.
Thanks, Charlotte. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned so far and where we're headed. So we began a pilot in March at a local elementary school. And heading into the pilot, we had, well, a lot of questions about this. We had tried it on some spouses and friends, but we were excited to get real people out in the real world with real students to use this. And so just to highlight some of the questions we brought into that pilot. So we wanted to know, like, okay, can these tutors actually deliver these lessons as intended with what we have in the support? So Charlotte and I had an observation tool, and we watched a lot of tutors to see were they actually delivering it accurately without us needing to intervene. We want to, of course, make sure the materials were appropriate for students. These are kindergartners. And so we needed to know, like, are they too short? Are they too long? Are they engaging enough? You know, are they excited to be there? We wanted to know how often students would need to repeat a lesson. Will tutors experience a confidence increase with repeated delivery? So we wanted to know, was there a difference between the first delivery of a lesson all the way to lesson 10? How long does it take for a tutor to feel confident, comfortable? We wanted to make sure the materials made sense. There weren't any like holes in our logic, and that they were intuitive. So we had a lot of questions heading into it, the pilot. And we also learned a lot. So a few things we learned, we made several, honestly, don't even think I captured all the material shifts, but we made a lot of tweaks, some of which we made like day 2. So there we were unstuffing and restuffing binders as we went when we jumped in and knew there was a tweak that we wanted to make immediately. But just a few things, we shifted some of the like order of the pages to make it more intuitive, so that tutors weren't getting lost in materials. We added in some support for the sound boxes. So initially we didn't have as much support for how to do those. And we learned that tutors were consistently doing those incorrectly or skipping pieces. And so we added in some more support for that. One of our big learnings was that the decodable passage initially was actually before the quick check. And so students were having to do that decodable before trying to read those words. And they were struggling to do their quick check after the decodable. It was just really a stamina issue. And we were realizing that the cognitive load of doing that decodable passage was basically expending all that they had at the end of their 20 minutes. And so we switched it to be optional. So those are some like tactical things we did differently. We started our tutors with no training, and we learned that they were happier and more comfortable if they had some training, even though it actually didn't affect their delivery. So we kind of amped up the tutoring. We learned a lot about what the roles and the functions were that were needed to actually execute this. So from like an operational perspective, Charlotte and I were on the ground every day, and we knew that to work at scale, it could not be Madison and Charlotte have to be there every day. And so we did a lot of documentation around like, what did we actually do? What was actually necessary to make this happen? And we're working right now to translate that information to some of our implementation partners and make sure we're able to effectively communicate, this is what it takes to run QC readers. We also learned that the students were excited. They loved it. It was important to Charlotte and I as former educators. There was joy, happiness. There were students bringing binders to us, making sure that we gave them their lesson and they got their prize and they were fully engaged. We had also engaged tutors. So they were committed. We had tutors that came regularly. We had a variety of tutors with a variety of backgrounds. This was tutoring at 7:20 in the morning. And so it meant something that they came every time. We talked to them a lot about their experience, and they all described it as easy to use and fun to use. And so we were happy with kind of just the sort of anecdotal information we got. We also, of course, ran a pre and post test with these students. So we had 15 kindergarten students, 13 of which we were able to get both pre and post test data. We used a mix of some curriculum-based assessments that we developed and DIBELS subtests, if you're familiar with DIBELS. And what we saw overall was just that there was some meaningful increase in both their phonemic awareness and their decoding skills, which were precisely what we were hoping to target. So we were really, this was in just 11 weeks. And as a former teacher, I can tell you that it's hard to see growth in that short of a time period. So we were really proud of what we saw and are excited to replicate it with some other partners this fall. Monroe can talk a little bit more if anybody has questions about how we got to the results and the analysis piece. But we're confident in what the approach has done. We're confident in the materials. I think we have promising student outcomes so far with our initial pilot, and we're looking to see replication with more partners this fall. So in terms of what's next for us, there's some immediate next steps. So we just finished on Monday training the last of 6 organizations to use this on their own this fall, which means that we are not on the ground with them. So we have 6 organizations. They mostly run after school programs, and we trained them to not only understand the materials, but to oversee volunteer tutors using them. We've talked with them a little bit about what roles and functions we played in order to execute. And so we're really looking to learn, have we equipped them with enough information to do this on their own? They're very confident right now, but of course, we're excited to see what happens. They should start tutoring in the next couple weeks. Longer term, we know that scale is the ultimate goal with this. We were looking to see how we could tap into existing capacity. So I think depending on what we learn this fall, we're looking to see how we can transfer this knowledge to broader audience. And I like to talk about, I think about like, this is my IKEA principle, but like, when you go to IKEA and you pick up a shelf, like you don't have to be an engineer and you don't have to bring someone home from IKEA. Like you can pretty much, for the most part, go home, open the directions and set up your shelf. That's where we want Queen City readers to be. We want to be able to hand this to an organization and they can sort of open it up, set it up and run it themselves, because ultimately that's how we're going to get to a significant amount of students. So that is all we have. I feel like that was a lot of information in 33 minutes, but we are happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Wow, thank you all. That was so much and really, really exciting. I just looking around the Zoom room and seeing who's here. I know there are people who have their wheels churning. Who wants to jump in with some questions for our Charlotte partners? While you're thinking about your question, I'll get things started with my first question. As you think about other cities like Philadelphia, what would you tell us to look for when we're looking for places to pilot this?
Sure. I think one of the things we've looked for, so we went through some pretty serious vetting conversations with partners leading into the fall to find the right group of people. And I think one of the biggest things we looked for was sort of organizational infrastructure and capacity. So practically speaking, like an organization that can intake volunteers easily, be able to communicate with them, organize them. There's some work to be done around matching up tutors and volunteers that takes some logistical and admin work to be able to make sure they're paired up appropriately and that you've filled out a student's dosage for a week. And so we looked for groups who were capable of doing that or had experience working with volunteers. We also felt like it was important to have somebody who is able to oversee the tutors and check for kind of quality and fidelity, especially early on. And so we needed to make sure that whatever organization was taking this on had the capacity to do those things. I think those were really important to us, along with just kind of, I think, just philosophical fit. Do they believe that a tutor can do this with students and that it's important and critical and that they're going to make sure that the student gets their dosage? We think about it a lot like medicine. If someone gives you a medication and tells you to take it 3 days a week, if you don't do that, there's no expectation it's going to work, right? And so it's the same thing with tutoring. These students need at least 3 doses a week. And so we needed commitment from these groups that they can make that happen in order to see results for their students. So I would say those are kind of the initial things we looked for.
Now I'll put a question to the Philadelphia folks. What excites you about what you just saw when you think about our own ecosystem and context?
I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Berger. I work at Penn School of Education, and we also piloted a tutoring program last spring, and we were creating a lot of materials. So I think seeing really wonderful created materials that are incredibly accessible for tutors and seem like fun and engaging for kids. And I think we've also been in the space of, we know that the best thing for kids would be highly trained teachers. And when that's not who you have, we at the university, we're using undergrads and grad students, some of whom have ed experience, but a lot of whom don't, and like how you fill that gap or raise them as much as you possibly can. So it's making materials that are accessible for them. So we've really tried to look at how do we train them? How do we raise them up? And I think these materials also then make it really accessible for them. And so seeing where those things meet feels really exciting.
There's a question in the chat that I'll read. So are the tutors implementing this primarily volunteers? It sounds like yes. If that's the case, how accountable has the system been? How in-depth is the data tracking?
So the answer is yes to volunteers. So at this point in time, we've run one pilot. And like I said, our staff was on the ground. And so definitely looking at accountability is something we're trying to figure out moving into the fall. You know, the farther away we get from on the ground, the more structured we have to be in how we get information. So there's a couple ways we're looking at it. We've been asking partners if they have an existing assessment that they give to students that's valid and reliable and measures the skills that we're looking for. And if they do, we're looking at data sharing possibilities to make sure we can measure any growth that happens with students. When they don't have an assessment, we have some curriculum-based assessments that Charlotte and I have created that we are going to train some of these partners to administer. So that is a learning for us this fall is, can we equip them to administer these assessments? They're as simple as we can make them, but at the end of the day, like administering assessments to kids can be difficult. And so it's something we're learning. We're hoping to get data back from them. I think long-term at scale, we obviously can't get data on every single individual student. And so I think we're trying to navigate kind of as we go, what's the right amount of feedback that we need. Because we're in a learning phase, we want the growth to make sure that we're replicating what we saw in the spring. Additionally, the progress tracker, I think, makes actually a lot of accountability, and it's pretty simple, but it's a good snapshot if you're overseeing multiple tutors to be able to look at one student and see, are they getting their dosage? Did they have like a major gap where they missed, 2 weeks of tutoring? The scores are recorded on there. And so even though we don't require them to like master each lesson, it's a good thing to notice, like, hey, is a student consistently getting 2 out of 10 on everything? Are we seeing any improvement in how many words they're getting right at the end of the lesson? Or are they not making any improvement? And so that provides some level of accountability for what's happening on the ground.
There's a couple questions in the chat that I think are related to the question that's in my mind. So I'm going to group them all together for you.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you can be clear with us about how you think about Queen City Readers. Do you think of it as its own program that you are running and kids are enrolling in Queen City Readers? Or do you think of it more as a tool that existing programs or organizations are layering into their work?
It's definitely the latter.
Definitely the latter, a
Yes.
tool layered into their work. And then does it happen, in the chat's asking, does it happen in school, outside of school? And how did you decide on 7:20 in the morning?
So in the spring, we had a very eager principal, kind of a mover and a shaker, who wanted to pilot this for us. And he said, I have kids standing at my doors at 7 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the school doors to open. And I know they need some help. So why can't let's try getting some volunteers in. So surprisingly, people do actually want to tutor that early in the morning because they can kind of get in and sort of check it off for their day and head in. So that's how the 7:20 happened, and it was successful. So that was kind of the 40 minutes before students formally started school, but they were already on the school grounds. So that was that principal's priority, and that's where the morning time frame came from. The groups that we have that are implementing this fall all run after school programs already and have their own programming, and they were looking for an opportunity to layer on additional support for that age group of students. And then for some of them, they have volunteers who come regularly, and they have struggled to find something for those volunteers to do that's like academic in nature, but isn't complicated, right? And so this appealed to them because it's simple and it doesn't require a significant amount of training. And so it's kind of a way for them to deploy the volunteers they already have.
It's really interesting how it's meeting different needs, keeping volunteers busy, keeping kids engaged, actual academic need. And for the keeping kids engaged in the morning, then this is to Nancy's question in the chat, kind of how are the students chosen? Was it just kind of everyone could use some support? If you're there, you get to do this, or were kids identified based on some assessment as?
So I think they chose the students in that case based on their school data, because in the spring, it was the actual school that we were working with. Most of these after school partners use sort of adverse selection anyway for their programs. And so their students are in their program by nature of being in need of support for the most part. It is, I know I've mentioned a lot of learnings, but it's just the phase we're at. We are looking to learn, is there a simple way to help a community group know which students are best suited for it? We haven't run up against the need for it just yet, but I think it'll come at some point.
What else would people like to know? Where do people, are the Philadelphia people seeing obvious places for this to be layered into our community? Whether it's your own organization or somebody else's, feel free to put someone else out there if you need to.
Jenny, I was less thinking about an organization at first, but just our new kind of change in terms of when schools are scheduled, and you've got schools that start at 9 o'clock in the morning, right, across the city, like maybe a third of elementary schools. And so I think those schools in particular feel really ripe for a preschool intervention, or a before school intervention, right? We have parents who are actually struggling to figure out, can their kids get dropped off? Now, getting the building open is a whole nother story, right? But I think some of like a really high quality volunteer engagement out of school time offering like this could make sense in a lot of schools.
That's a really interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's a hot topic. What are these kids doing? So a lot of our schools, as you all just heard, for busing issues, are now opening at 9. We don't have enough buses to get all kids to all schools at 8.
One surprise, local surprise that we've had is when we looked at the tutoring challenge, the imbalance between supply and demand that Madison mentioned earlier last fall. We knew that thinking about our design principles, we didn't attempt to do something that could help all kids. And so that focus on K1 was very intentional. And what we didn't know was coming in with, particularly with schools and community groups that have kids across grade ranges, how they would respond. So in elementary school, you all know, like you all, third grade is the testing year, and so much of the gravity around tutoring is like second and third grade. How would the school respond if we said, well, actually, we have something for kindergarten, right? When a lot of people think, oh, we have lots of time to get those kids on track. In the past, in our engagement with community partners, because they have kids across a range of grades, they were often generally interested in things that could support all the kids, not just one narrow grade band. And I think we have been very pleasantly surprised by the receptivity. Now, a lot of what we do, we didn't really punch on it here, but it's really talk about the importance of kindergarten, strategically important, all of that. And the U.S. Department of Ed, right, as Secretary Cardona just recently, made some statements about the importance of kindergarten. And so we talk about it strategically. We've been really surprised at how they've been responding to this, and really seeing this and responding to it as a strategic need. One of our partners, it's been interesting, the training and the conversations that Madison and Charlotte has had. We had a partner last week came in that was only planning to pilot this at one of their sites. And after they went through the training and saw how easy it was to use and administer, immediately decided that all the kindergartners across all of their sites, I don't remember how many sites they have, 6 to 8, something like that, Oh, 5. All of them, they want all of them to get it. And this is a group that works up through, what do they work through? Grade 5, grade 6?
5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6. And so that has been a pleasant surprise for us. I don't know what it's like in Philadelphia, but when we've done our surveys, kindergarten is not a group, not an age or grade level that typically gets tutoring. It really starts somewhat in first grade, but it's heavily focused on grades 2 and 3. And so to see that response from our community partners so far, we've also, I think, had some success with our school district to really look at kindergarten more strategically important. Just last night, I heard our chief of strategy innovation tell our school board how important kindergarten was strategically, which was really, really great to hear. So that sort of strategic move, and what I often tell people is it will never get easier, right? It will never get easier. And as you think about the idea of how could we engage and equip more people in our community, those early grades are the opportunity, because once a kid gets further along, you need somebody with more training, more expertise, and the reasons that they're behind could be more varied and more complex. And so I think we're starting to see people respond more to that. There's another angle that we are also working on, and that's with our business community. If you have, what we tell them, if you have project management skills, you can coordinate, you can schedule, we can equip you to use Queen City Readers, right, as a business community that's partnering with a school. And so we're having some conversations with some of the companies here. Financial, we're a financial center in our country, and a lot of those financial companies have project managers. And so again, we designed this really intentionally to help build upon the capacity that already exists in our community. I do think one mind shift we're working on is a lot of groups are used to, well, I send my employees as volunteers to this group and they handle everything. But the idea that they themselves might be able to use what they know and use in their everyday business to help support kids with reading, we're at the beginning of that journey. And our experience is all it takes is 1 or 2 examples of a company successfully doing something, and then the others look at it and say, oh, I understand that, we can do that too. So we're working on it. We think we have a lead possibly with one of our local companies that's really interested in how they can help schools in their part, in the northern part of the county, which doesn't normally get as much attention. So again, I think this is opening up new frontiers, both with groups that we could leverage and engage, but also how do we think about and see the capacity in our community and equip them with this tool. I will say that we're surprised by the level of community-based organizations that already had tutoring or literacy as part of what they do be interested in this resource. We didn't think they would be our earliest customers, and they are surprising us with their interest.
Right. 2 questions about kind of the different ways of thinking about this tool. One is, have you thought about whether it is appropriate for use with 4 and 5-year-olds in their last year of preschool? And the second is around whether, like, the quality and age of the tutor, and given how you put the burden on the materials, could you imagine this be done with older students in a kind of cross-age activity within a school?
I'm
I
gonna,
can answer.
yeah,
Which
go
one
ahead.
you-
I was
okay.
defer to you.
Okay. I can take the one on preschool, pre-K is what we call it down here. I know it's called something different everywhere else, but the year before kindergarten. It is something we actually did explore for a couple months here. We sort of wandered into the exploration. And I think where we're at now is we've learned is that some students developmentally probably are ready for it and could handle it, and some are not. And that there would need to be some discretion from whomever's administering it to understand the differences with those needs. But it certainly is possible. We've chosen to kind of set that down for now strategically and kind of come back to it. But we talked to several local groups who taught 4-year-olds to kind of get their impression. I think one of the other things they mentioned were the need for some more hands-on activities, sensory type stuff, sort of the movement, some of those additional things you need at that age that we don't currently have built into the materials. And so it was kind of the consideration that if you were someone who wanted to take this content and use it with 4-year-olds, you would need to layer on some of that additional stuff, but also have the discretion and understanding to know when a student is ready or not ready for it, which is different from kindergartners when they're all in school and they're getting this day-to-day regardless. So that was kind of our initial thoughts on the pre-K angle. To speak to tutors, we have said consistently high school education, and we have definitely offered to other groups to use actual high schoolers for it. We haven't seen it done yet. I think I would need to see or hear from partners about using high school students to start to see how far down that could go. But it's certainly something to consider.
So I think the next set of questions are really very nuts and boltsy, right? So which gets to the overall question of what does it actually cost to do this? It seems to me the first question is, would you make the materials available for free, or at some point would these materials be like licensed material from you all? And if you don't know the answer to that yet, that's fine. But then beyond that, like the staffing ratios. So what are the other costs to actually implementing this, and what would someone be looking at as they started to think about it?
Yeah,
In broad brush.
I can take part of that. So our hope is eventually to make the materials essentially open source and available for more groups. It's not in the short-term future, but it's probably in the longer-term future. I think a big part of that is contingent on us figuring out how to train groups more remotely. Right now, we've done hands-on training, like practice in person. And so we've got some work to do to figure out how we would train somebody else. And then just tactically speaking, we get paid to work in Charlotte and we're not a national group. And so there's some consideration there for us about how we make it available more widely. But that is the hope eventually, that other people could use it. Certainly. And I think if someone was eager enough to come down here and attend one of our trainings, we would be happy to talk with somebody about how we might work that out. Funding, Monroe, I might need your help on this question. I think it's tricky because we've looked at the volunteer model is really what we're looking for. And so that's reliant on existing staff and capacity in an existing organization.
Mm-hmm.
I would say when we were doing the pilot, we had, I would say you needed at least 3 people who were kind of involved in overseeing implementation. And so if you kind of think about that in terms of what you may already have in an organization, that might help you quantify a little bit what the funding might need to be. Monroe, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
Well, I think about this question in 2 ways. So one is like, what's the actual cost of materials? So basically it's a binder of materials, and our vision is to make all the materials, like all the PDFs available, and then you can put together your own binder. We are currently working on that. Actually on Tuesday, we have a service day with our local Vanguard office, and they're putting together 500 binders for us. Madison, what do we got? Do you recall what we have the cost per binder down to right now?
150.
150 a binder.
Yeah.
So that's $150 a binder. The materials are designed to be reused. So they're all sheet protected, use dry erase markers and wipe them off. So multiple use. We have not calculated out like what that cost is per student, but you can sort of do the math. The ratios we've seen so far is from the pilot is like 15 adults for every 10 kids. And you can structure a schedule to be able to get them to get their 3 doses a week. So within an hour, because it's 20-minute sessions, 1 adult can serve 2 kids. And then when you run that out, we've been able to figure out that 15 to 10 ratio. So in terms of like the direct cost of the program, we've been very, very thoughtful and intentional about that from the beginning. But the other sort of operational costs, like I don't think we've begun to really put our arms around it. And again, it was intended to like tap into the existing infrastructure that a group has. We wanted to expand their capacity to help with some aspect of literacy.
Right. So you're talking about buying a binder for every tutor. So kind of 15 binders, right, or 10 binders. And you're talking about some percentage of staff time and oversight, and some set aside time for training of the staff and the volunteers. And other than that, I don't excuse me, I don't see a lot of costs, which is really, really great. We have 5 minutes left. I want to make sure that I didn't miss something in the chat that people want to raise up, or other reflections. They don't have to be questions.
Kate, I think you had a question. You had your hand up a moment ago. Sorry, I just decided it was so close to the end, but I think my question about costs was more like if you wanted to expand beyond, what are your costs to hire more staff to manage more volunteers versus, being able to leverage, you've got one person going into a school, you can leverage a few more volunteers and serve a few kids, and cost structures around funding sources around that. But I heard your answer and decided it might not be the question, might not be the way that you're attacking the problem. So I didn't ask it.
Yeah, it's a great question. We didn't attempt to tackle, we tried to tackle the literacy problem. Like, what could we do to help with some aspect, and how could we of literacy, and how could we make that quick and accessible and effective? But yeah, that's a great question, but I don't think we had a good handle on the answer.
So the last thing that comes to mind for me, and I could probably do the math here myself, but it sounds like it takes roughly 6 months to run a child through the set of lessons. I'm doing my own back of the envelope math and assuming some vacation weeks here and there. Is that roughly right?
To do all 62, that's probably pretty close. The factors to consider are, one, if you're going through all 62, or if you just have kindergarten students, you're going to stop at the end of that 26, the kindergarten level. You assume roughly 3 times a week, but you're right, there's lots of work days and vacations in there. And then the other piece that can complicate a little bit is because the students can repeat a lesson, they start to go like this, because you've got the one who never repeated one and the one who's repeating every one. And all of a sudden you've got a student on 21 and a student on 10. And so there is some adjustments there.
Mhm.
You can do a lot of good damage in a semester.
Good
If you were organized and all the upfront work, and you had a semester, you can do some good work in a semester with a group of kindergartners. I would say even first graders that didn't master those kindergarten materials. For kid on level, this is practice. For kids who are behind, this is going to help them catch up. Multilingual learners, we have some questions about could it go beyond first grade? Say a second grader is a multilingual learner new to the community, perhaps. Again, this goes back to the discretion of who's working with those students and whatever. Again, we're providing a tool. We know this works for kindergartners, and it's interesting, sort of the locus of gravity is really pulling this to kindergarten. And we although we have the first grade materials, we have the strong suspicion a lot of this is going to be kindergarten focused.
Yep. All right, I'm going to let people go in a second, but I'm going to put out there on the record for my Philadelphia partners, if there is an organization here who thinks they are ripe to pilot this, please reach out to me. Read by Fourth can probably find a way to get you to Charlotte at a time that works for Charlotte to do some training when they're already training other people, so that we're not burdening them. But let's keep the conversation going. And if you have follow-up questions, send them our way, and we will make sure we share the recording of this as soon as it is uploaded to our Lunch and Learn section of our website. I cannot thank Charlotte, Madison, and Monroe enough. Yes. You guys were great. Thanks so much for sharing your learnings.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.